Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher. And in today's video, I want to talk about planning your practice sessions. So the whole reason for this is that as a young musician, I was insanely disorganized. And in the beginning, it wasn't really a big deal because I was practicing music so much. And if you kind of just dive in head first, and you're practicing a lot and you're generally working on things that are challenging, that can work for a while. But at some point, I started getting a lot of diminishing returns. I was really over practicing a lot. I was noodling. My practice sessions were really unbalanced and unfocused. So there's really two parts to the practice planning system that I have. The first part is making a monthly plan around the big picture areas that you want to cover. So for example, we may have some different big picture musical skills that we want to develop. We're all going to have repertoire. Maybe you want to learn sight reading or improv skills, do some ear training. This list could be super, super long, depending on what kind of musician you are, what kind of genre you're interested in. So I have a video dedicated to this type of planning, this kind of bigger picture, bigger horizon planning. So I'll leave a link here in the description and on the screen here. So if you want to get started with setting up a monthly plan, I recommend you do that first. Now, what this video is about how to actually plan your practice sessions the day of. So if you actually want to, practice before you go to work, or maybe you're studying music in a music school and you want to dedicate some time, maybe an hour or even 3 or 4 hours a day to practice, something like that. I want to give you some ideas for how to actually structure your sessions themselves. So the first thing is that I find a lot of people, and this was myself included, can waste an enormous amount of practice time noodling, reviewing things that you can already do. A very common thing that happens in the practice room, people are working on a new piece. You could be a classical musician, a jazz musician, doesn't really matter, but you learn one part of the piece really well, and then some of the other parts aren't getting the attention they deserve. That was super common as I was growing up. When I was a teenager, I would master, half of a classical guitar piece, and the piece would kind of get lopsided, and I didn't really have a lot of mindfulness or strategy around fixing that. I kind of just sat down and would work on the piece, and that meant kind of replaying things. So I just want to make everyone aware that, when you're a beginner, it can be fine to, if you're working on a piece, just sitting down and going through it, you can tend to be reasonably productive. But as you start to work on pieces that are more challenging, music that's more challenging for you, and pieces that are extremely long, this strategy of just repeating things over and over again and not really having a plan, it tends to not work very well. So that's the whole purpose. We need some kind of strategy. So that being said, people are noodling, they're kind of lopsiding their practice. Maybe they're over focusing on certain things and under focusing on other things. What I have found to be super useful is to just draft an actual plan of what I'm going to do in the moment. Now, I don't always do this. There are plenty of times where I practice and I just have an idea like, okay, I'm working on this song and I know what I need to do next. And if that's working, then that's fine. This strategy I'm going to show you now is something that I employ when I feel like my practice is starting to get more fuzzy and I really want to be focused and get a lot of specific things done. This is a very effective technique to use. So let's say hypothetically you're going to practice for 60 minutes. So what I would do is I would find some way of splitting that time up. So you could do this in 10-minute block, 15-minute blocks, 20-minute blocks. I think those are reasonable approaches to take. And I'm just going to make a general plan for what I'm going to do and in what order. So I have my 15-minute blocks. This 4 of them is going to give me a 60-minute practice session. Now I'm going to fill these areas here with things from my monthly plan. So again, I have a monthly plan with specific repertoire, maybe improv skills, ear training skills. And now I know what I want to work on for the month already. I have another list that has that on it. Now I'm going to actually populate things into my practice plan. So maybe I'll work on this block will be a piece. This will be some ear training stuff. Maybe this will be a technique thing I'm working on. And then maybe this will be, something else like reviewing something from last month or something like that. Now, if you are new to practice planning, something simple like this can just be a fantastic thing to do. It's really low tech. It's really just straight up. And what this does is it just prevents you from getting really off the rails in the practice session. It prevents you from spending an hour just playing through one piece over and over and over again. It prevents you from really lopsiding your practice and not being mindful about how you're using your time. So this looks deceptively simple, but this strategy can actually pay huge dividends. And one of the other reasons I really like this strategy is it puts these natural pause points in your practice. So, you could set a timer if you want to, that's fine. You could also just keep a clock nearby and generally check, if you go a few minutes under or a few minutes over, it doesn't really matter. That's not the spirit of this. The spirit of this is that at these kind of natural pause points, you're closing down what you're working on. You're packing up. So if you're working on a piece and you just got through the first 16 bars or something, you're saying, okay, well, I got through that and this was the progress I made. And then you might take a break for a minute or two here, and now you move on to the next thing. And I find that just having these natural pause points, it tends to make people more mindful. So even if hypothetically you went 5 minutes over here, or this was actually 10 minutes instead of 15 minutes, again, that's not really the important thing. The important thing is that you are being intentional about how you're gonna use your time before you actually jump in and start practicing. And I would say that's one of the best things that this kind of daily practice planning can really help with. It just prevents people from going off the rails and wasting their time. Now, if you want to just sit around, play your instrument, play a song, and you're not really interested in making a lot of big picture progress on something, then that's fine. You don't need to use this. But this is something I'm going to deploy when, say, I only have like an hour to practice today and I do want to make progress on something. I like to be a little more intentional about how I'm going to use my time. But also, if I have been feeling maybe in my practice sessions lately, it's gotten a little too unstructured, this can be a great thing to start using. So I would say that would be a great place to start if you're a beginner. And for some bigger picture principles, if you are a beginner and you're doing this kind of practice planning, I would recommend you try to be very specific about what you're working on. So again, let's say this little thing you're doing here in the A section is like a Bach piece that you're working on, and you've dedicated 15 minutes to this. You should be dedicating 15 minutes to a specific thing in the piece. So are you still learning how to just play the opening 8 bars? Or maybe there's a section in the middle that has a lot of technical challenges. You should be making progress on something that's challenging for you to do, but you're actually going to see some kind of improvement over the next 15 minutes. There is a time and a place to just review things to make sure that you're not getting rusty with those, but just to make sure you're not getting rusty with previously learned material. But generally speaking, when you have something on your plan here, you should have a specific idea of what you're doing. So it shouldn't just be play through the Bach piece a ton of times. There should actually be a reason. If you're going to do a run through, it's probably better off that you film it and listen back to it and try to figure out what you're trying to improve. So that's kind of the whole point to setting this up, is that you're just, again, being more mindful about how you're setting up your time. Now, another strategy you can do is you can put in some variety purposely into the practice plan. So, for example, if I had this huge Bach piece that I was working on, and I was going to practice for 2 or 3 hours one day, it's very unlikely I'm going to do 2 or 3 hours of practice in a row. I probably would do a bunch of 45-minute sessions or a bunch of 60-minute sessions. But what I'm going to do on purpose here is I'm going to put some variety in my practice session. So what can happen if, say you have, this huge Bach piece to work on, and you also want to do some ear training and practice some scales and stuff like that, I would purposely put some variety in the practice session. So if I needed to practice for like 2 or 3 hours today, I'd have a couple of these cards or something like this written out in a notebook. I might do the Bach for like 15 or 30 minutes and then purposely put something that's completely different next in the practice plan. I might go for a walk and do some ear training while I listen to an audio recording, or I might work on something that's more technical, like a scale thing. I'm a guitarist, so for me, playing the piano is a good change in what I'm doing. And I really, really recommend that, because there's a lot of evidence that supports, there's a lot of literature in terms of the science of learning, that we do benefit a lot from taking breaks, and we do benefit from more variety in our learning. So it can seem very structured to do something like, well, I'm going to practice for 3 hours today, so the first hour and a half will just be Bach the whole time. And then, the next hour and a half, I'll do a half an hour of scales, and then I'll do whatever, half an hour of something else. And one of the reasons I like doing kind of a daily practice plan is that you can take advantage of the spacing effect, and you can also just take advantage of this principle of adding more variety into your practice. So I might do maybe the first section of the Bach piece for 15 minutes, and then do ear training, like something that's totally different, like jazz ear training. And then maybe I'll work on something on the piano. Maybe I'm doing some kind of piano technique thing or some kind of guitar technique thing. And then I'll come back to the Bach and work on something else. And not only will you probably find that it's more enjoyable to actually practice like that, there tends to be more variety in terms of the material you're covering. There are considerable benefits to spacing things out and adding more interference and variation into what you're doing. So that's one of the other reasons I really like taking this this lens of planning my practice sessions for the day. And usually what I'll do at the start of the day, I'll figure out how much time I have to practice, and I'll make a general list of what I'm going to follow. Now, sometimes I might ice one of these and end up not working on it, or maybe I'm really into this thing and I end up not doing this thing. I wouldn't get bent out of shape on little things like that. The bigger picture thing is, are you being intentional with your time, and are you getting more out of doing this than you would have just gotten from noodling and kind of messing around? Now, once you're at that level where you can plan your practice and you can set up a couple 15 or 20 minute blocks and perform them, which, by the way, you don't have to do 60 minutes. I mean, if you're new to planning your practice in a structured way, maybe you start with just two or three 10-minute blocks, or 2 or 3 15-minute blocks. So you do something shorter. So this can actually be used as a training mechanism to train yourself to practice for longer. I mean, there's nothing wrong with, 3 10-minute blocks is a great practice session, and I still use that sometimes. Depending on how I'm feeling, I might make the individual time lengths a little bit shorter. So feel free to use all those kinds of strategies, and I think that's a very great place to start for whether you're a beginner or intermediate, someone who's just trying to be more intentional with their time. Now, once you can do that, and that feels good, and in the spirit of not overcomplicating things, that may be enough for you. You may not need to do more. There's another strategy you can use that's slightly more complicated, but tends to work very, very well. So instead of setting our sessions up in this way where we have 4 15-minute blocks covering completely different things, what I might do is wire in some interleaving into my practice session. So if you're not familiar with the research on interleaving versus space practice, you got to go read about that. You got to go watch some videos about that. I have a video on my channel about it. Some of my favorite communicators on this topic, go watch Molly Gebrian talk about this topic. She's a thinker on music education, music pedagogue. She's a wonderful violist. Go watch her channel. Her book's amazing. She talks about interleaving too. But even outside of the realm of music education, the interleaving effect or that whole educational phenomenon is something that's well documented outside of music education. So you should know about this. But essentially, the spirit and the punchline of interleaving is that it can actually help learning when there's a little more variation on a micro scale in terms of what you're practicing. So for example, instead of, say I was practicing something for 15 minutes, say I have 2 things here that I'm going to practice for 15 minutes, instead of doing one for 7 or 8 minutes, and then the other one for 7 or 8 minutes, it could actually be more beneficial to go back and forth a little more frequently. I might do 2 or 3 minutes of practicing a certain jazz harmony concept, and then 2 or 3 minutes of practicing a melody to a tune. Now, this can get kind of crazy to plan out, and you can get diminishing returns after a certain point in time where if you plan out, 49 things to interleave, it's not necessarily the best use of your time. So a very simple way that I've found to do this is you still set up your practice sessions with these 15 or 20-minute blocks, but within the block, you kind of have two things that you're working on that are quite a bit different than each other. So this little A thing here could be a melody from a Bach tune. Maybe I'm working on the first 8 bars of a new Bach tune. And then the B section here could be this ear training thing that I'm doing that has to do with some kind of jazz chord progression that I'm trying to work on. And I might, every 2 or 3 minutes go back and forth between the two. Now, again, if you're not familiar with the literature on interleaving, this seems insane. This seems very reckless and kind of chaotic, but the mind actually learns slightly better from having this kind of interference in your learning. The concepts will tend to stick better. So that's the first thing that I'll do. I'll make a few rounds of this kind of interleaved practice and set it up like that. So I'm really able to cover kind of 6 things here. Then what I'll do at the bottom here is I will take 15 minutes, and often I will jump on a treadmill. I have like a walking pad at home, or if it's warm enough, I'll go walk around the block. I'll go walk around for 15 minutes, and I will do pure mental recall on everything that I've done from that practice session. And I'll do recall maybe on some other things too. So I might, if I plan this out on a set of index cards, I'll have like a little card with me like this of what I covered. And I'll start going for my walk, and I'm trying to summon everything I just did. So can I hear the melodies of the things that I was working on? Can I sing them from memory? Can I see the chord shapes on the guitar? Do I understand the theory? Can I recall the theory from the things I was working on? Okay, I was on the 2 chord and I put, this superimposed thing on it if I'm studying some kind of jazz harmony thing. So I'm really doing a few things here. I'm trying to do some light mental practice, so visualizing playing the instrument. I'm trying to connect that with my ear. So whether I'm working on a classical piece or a jazz piece or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. I want to be able to summon the sounds that I was hearing during the practice session. Because if I'm not able to do that, really what I'm doing is just mashing buttons on the instrument and memorizing which buttons to press. I want to make sure I can actually audiate the things that I'm doing. And then the last thing is I'm trying to recall the theoretical concepts. So, okay, this Bach, the first 8 bars, it looked like it went like 1, 5, 1, 4, 1. Whatever it is, there might be like a harmonic scheme going on. Maybe the melody and the bass have some certain rhythmic pattern or rhythmic interplay. So I'm trying to recall the big picture things of what I've done. Now, again, this is one of these principles. If you look into the science of learning, there's a wonderful book called Make It Stick, which is a great public-facing book on these kind of bigger picture principles for learning. But active recall is one of the best things that you can do. Active recall, retrieval practice, testing yourself, they're really all pointing to the same thing. When you have to produce knowledge from your own mind without notes in front of you, you know the material much better. And this is why many people, whether in high school or in university, this is why many people who reread their notes many times and don't do any kind of testing are absolutely floored by how bad their knowledge is when they are tested, because rereading things is actually an insanely inefficient way to encode information into your mind. Active recall is a much better way to do this. Now, when it comes to music education, there's different kinds of recall. We want to be able to recall, okay, this was the motor pattern. I know what the motor pattern is. We want to be able to recall the theoretical concepts. So do I know what these chords are called? Do I know, the big picture theory things in this piece? Oh, it's, this is the exposition and this is, this part. I want to be able to recall those kinds of things. But the biggest thing by far, and this is something I think a lot of people miss out on, you want to be able to recall the actual sounds of the things you're working on. And this has nothing to do with you memorizing the piece. So even if I was going to play music in a situation where I have the notation in front of me, I still want to know what the piece sounds like. I don't want to be just looking at the notation and then kind of waiting for my instrument to make the sound and listening to myself after. I want to be audiating the piece really thoroughly. I want to have an insanely clear idea of what the piece should sound like. And so this is why I put this review block here. And so, mental practice is a wonderful thing to do, but this thing here, it's going beyond a little bit mental. It's going beyond mental practice a little bit. It's more about total retrieval of everything. And if you're new to retrieval practice or mental practice, it can feel quite abstract and kind of painful to do at first. But I would recommend, you have your little list here. You've probably written this down now in a notebook or on an index card or something. You've planned your practice. Just go for a walk, and for 15 minutes, try to review each of these in order. So, okay, here was the 8 bars from the Bach melody. You run through it. Okay, here was that jazz harmony concept. Can I hear it? Can I visualize it on the instrument? And that's an insanely powerful thing to do. Now, if you get to the end of the list while you're on the review, just keep cycling through it. That's completely fine. And so it's good to do extra retrievals. And I think there was a guy, Jeff Karpicki, who was a student of Henry Roediger's. They've done a lot of research on retrieval practice and the testing effect, which is fun because I am retrieving that information right now. But they've done a lot of research on this stuff, and they've showed that multiple retrievals, multiple tests in a single study session outperform just one correct repetition. So what the heck do I mean? I mean, when you're on your little retrieval walk, or you're kind of doing your retrieval practice at the end of the session, don't just review it once and, I got the right answer once, so that means I have it. No, you want to do multiple. So you want to blitz through this, and then preferentially go through it like 3 or 4 times if you can. Now, some of these things you might be able to go through pretty quickly. Like sometimes when I'm working on a jazz harmony concept, I'm just playing it and improvising with it over many keys. So it might only take me a second to retrieve. And same with, a short melody from a piece. It just takes a second to retrieve. And so your retrieval block could actually be longer. That's fine. But these are the things that I would do once you're past this kind of beginner stage of being able to manage your time. This is a way that you can beef it up a bit more, add some interleaving, and then add some retrieval practice. And what you can do, just in terms of saving yourself some time, if you have a plan for what you're going to work on over the month, you can just make a template for, okay, I have these things I have to do this month. I have, there's 5 things or 10 things, you have a couple things in each of these buckets that you're working on. Just make yourself a couple practice templates that you can use. So when you wake up, in the morning before you go to work, you don't have to actually architect this, in the morning before you've had coffee. You can just say, this is how I'm practicing. This is what I'm doing. Now, for the sake of ensuring people that really this is not about being organized. This is not about creating a super nice looking notebook with your practice plan and all that kind of stuff. If you like that, then go ahead. This is really just about driving results in your practice session. And I've really just often seen that there are many musicians who have all the musical resources they need to have. They have, the requisite instrument, they have good teachers, they have all that kind of stuff. But there's typically not enough guidance on how to structure practice sessions in a way that's super effective. Now, you'll have to do some trial and error with this. This is just an example. Maybe this feels too rushed to you, and you'd be better off, cut one of these and then make these all 20 minutes long. Maybe that feels a little bit better for you, Maybe this feels like too much time. You would do better off with a ton of 10-minute tasks. I don't know about structuring things in terms of 5-minute kind of blitzes, because we're already kind of doing that with the interleaving. I'm doing this for a few minutes and then this for a few minutes. So it's kind of like that already. But my recommendation here is to experiment with it. But experiment using big picture principles from the science of learning that we know have already been empirically validated. So what are these big picture principles that you want to make sure you're putting into your practice plan? You want to make sure you're learning to audiate stuff and doing mental practice. So summon the sounds of the things you're working on from your memory, not just the motor patterns. So when you're doing mental practice, it's not enough just to visualize what your hand should look like and kind of play it in the right rhythm. You should be hearing the sounds as clearly as you can in your mind. And I do acknowledge for some people that's quite challenging. Some people have aphantasia. They don't hear things that clearly, but still do the best you can, because that's really what playing music is all about, is the actual sound. And so we get very hijacked by what's going on in the notation, the theory, the motor movements. So really make the sound front and center. Make sure you're doing active recall and retrieval practice with all kinds of stuff. This has nothing to do with you memorizing pieces of music. So even if you don't want to play pieces of music from memory, it's still very beneficial to do the retrieval practice, because the retrieval practice will help you, again, get that sound in your ear, but it will also help make sure that you know the theory of what you're working on. And you'll just generally be more secure with the things that you're working on if you're able to retrieve them. And then that last step, again, that interleaving. So we now have, we have audiation and mental practice. They're related, but not exactly the same. We have this kind of active recall, this retrieval practice, and we have this interleaving. Those few things combined with having a monthly plan makes a very powerful practice system. And it's actually quite simple to set up. I mean, really what I'm talking about, you can go watch my other video on practice planning. I'm talking about writing down a handful of big picture buckets and a couple of things you want to work on each month. I mean, you can draft that reasonably quickly. And then it comes down to, okay, now you have your monthly plan. What are you going to do today? Now, if you can just practice without any of, planning like this, then that's fine. But this kind of last example that I showed you, it's very hard to just naturally do this in a sense. So you could theoretically just sit down and kind of jump from one thing to another, and you would get some of these interleaving benefits. And then if you do some retrieval practice, you're great. I just find that this is much easier to follow. I just set a timer for 15 minutes. Okay, all I got to do for 15 minutes is bounce back and forth between these two things every couple minutes. Boom. Now let's go into the next thing. Boom. Now I'm going for a walk and doing retrieval practice. And the last thing I'll say about this is that as I've started to use this type of thing, it's been many years since I've been doing this, but what I've noticed is that I used to practice for a few hours every day, but I was really just repeating things and not making great progress on what I was doing. And now what I'm up to, usually I'll practice 2 or 3 hours a day, but holy smokes, I'm really getting through many things, because I'm not going to make a plan like this that says noodle for half an hour, then replay something for 45 minutes straight that I've been playing today. You're much more likely to actually make something that is sane and has variety and addresses your weak points. And so there's a lot of huge things kind of flying around here, but those are the big principles: making sure you're intentional, active recall, can you audiate everything? The interleaving is nice too to get in there. And then, once in a while, I think it's a great idea to take one of these and just use it as an actual review block, not a retrieval review block, but a review block where you just play through things you already know. Once every week or two, you should probably play through some repertoire that you haven't played for a while so that you don't forget it. And you can kind of factor that in here. And this is a wonderful system to do that. You could also have a 15-minute block where you play through some repertoire and film yourself. And that could be one of your blocks. So you can actually get quite creative with how you use these individual blocks and what you're doing. I mean, I really like to mix it up. It'll be some classical guitar thing, and then some kind of jazz guitar thing, a piano thing. I'm working on some kind of rhythmic thing. I might be working on a cajon. And I've found that if you structure 2 or 3 hours of practice like that, it is much more enjoyable to do. I think when I was younger, I could do 2 or 3 hours of practice a day, but I kind of would need to be in a flow state and just like playing through things. So I wasn't really making a lot of great progress on things. So those are just some ideas. Again, take these ideas, try them out, road test them, change them, make them work for you. I mean, I love this kind of stuff, and I don't even do it all the time. Sometimes I'll go a few days and I don't plan anything. I know what I need to be working on, and I'm kind of locked in. It's very clear to me, like, okay, I need to do the next thing for this piece. I don't care about having this written in a notebook. That's not a big issue with me. But when I can feel like, I'm feeling off the last couple days, life is busy. I only have an hour to practice this morning. I think I've been noodling a bit too much in the practice room. Boom. This always gets me back on track. So again, it's not something you have to rigidly do every time you practice. Still make time for yourself to mess around and work on things and review things. And this is just one tool that you can have in your tool belt. And it's a very powerful tool if you really want to learn skills, learn repertoire. So if you have any questions or comments, hit me down below. Have a wonderful day. Take care.